like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the special meeting agenda, the City Council study session, February 10, 2010. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Salazar.
Here.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Here.
Mayor Ruane.
Here.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Here.
Councilmember Ibarra will be joining us, but probably a little bit later. Item 2, conduct study session. Conduct study session to review additional expenditure reductions and other budget strategies addressing $1.3 million revenue expense shortfall for the city's current budget. And I'll give it to staff. We have a presentation for you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. First, I just wanted to comment a little bit on the setup and maybe make a suggestion for the City Council. Our intent tonight was to give you the maximum opportunity to engage a study session conversation in order that you can, once you hear the presentation, take the opportunity to discuss among yourselves and to receive comment from the audience as well. So the setup is just a little bit awkward, and if you'd like to shuffle yourselves around a little bit to get comfortable, please do so. Secondly, having you up on the risers creates a little bit of a safety concern, so please be careful in moving your wheeled chairs around so that you don't fall off. That would not be good.
I think that's why police and fire are here tonight.
Just a couple of introductory comments. First and foremost, the purpose of tonight's study session is, as I indicated, to provide the opportunity for the dissemination and sharing of information, the opportunity for discussion among the City Council and with interested members of our employee workforce and the public, and to identify specific recommended strategies for addressing what is, and we will explain further, is a continuation and unfortunate worsening of the city's budget situation for the current year. And I'll just make note of the fact that while you will hear in the presentation tonight that we anticipate continuation of this very difficult economic circumstances and the very challenging impacts on our city operations, our city services, and our city resources, the focus of tonight's comments will be on recommended strategies for the current year. We will be addressing on a forward-looking basis, some recommended approaches to dealing with the coming year's economic situation, and we would seek the City Council's conversation and guidance on those issues as well. Our presentation tonight, and you'll be hearing from both Jim O'Leary, our Administrative Services Director, and myself, our presentation divides into several different categories. First, we'll be providing background and information regarding the overall economic circumstances and the economic environment. Some of this information you will have heard before, some of the slides you may have seen before, and we deliberately repeat this information not only for the benefit of the City Council, but for the benefit of the public, in order that it is, we are providing adequate opportunities for clear, complete understanding of this important information within our community. Secondly, we will address the impacts and what does this mean for the city of San Bruno. Again, some of this you will have seen before. Thirdly, we will address what is the outlook and what does this mean for San Bruno going forward. And we will address, as I indicated before, recommended strategies both for addressing a deficit in the current year's budget that was unexpected when we adopted the budget in June of 2009. And we will propose some additional strategies to begin this year to address the situation into the future. So with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Jim O'Leary, and he will go through the first part of it. We will be, everybody in the audience as well as the City Council has a handout which tracks exactly on the slides that will be shown on the screen. Feel free to either watch the screen or the item that you have in your hand. Thank you.
All right, just before Jim starts, I just want to say there's no item on this agenda this evening that says public comment. But I want to encourage all of you to please step forward with any suggestions you might have to get us through this budget mess. So we're here to get you suggestions. It's not specifically stated that way, but in its lack of saying that, we want to encourage you. We're looking for any and all ideas, hopefully of a positive nature, that you can add to help us get through this, because we're all in this together. So I thank you for attending, and Jim, we're ready. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, right up front I'd like to say that if any of you are weary of having me present bad budget information, there's no one more weary of it than myself in having to do it. And as the city manager indicated, some of the material that I wanted to go over with you tonight, you saw as recently as 2 council meetings ago when the second quarter budget update was presented to you, which really presented to you staff's concerns and focus on this year's budget, indicating that despite the great deal of work that our employees and the council and the staff conducted in delivering a balanced budget this year, that there are circumstances that have led to our concerns that this year the budget will be out of balance, primarily because revenues are not coming in at the level that were anticipated when the budget was approved. Would ask your indulgence in going through and again trying to present the entire picture of both the economic situation and how it directly impacts the city and impacts the general fund. First, as it relates to just the economic update, anywhere in the country right now, there are really issues that are impacting San Bruno and San Mateo County that have a direct impact on the city of San Bruno. And generally those have to do with property assessment, property sales, residential assessed values are declining in San Mateo County, declining in San Bruno. Foreclosures are at a historic high, really resulting in a negative impact on one of our primary revenue sources, which is property tax, that is calculated directly related to assessed values of properties within the jurisdiction. California unemployment rate is now at 12.4%. The San Mateo County unemployment rate is above 9%, which is double the rate it was 2.5 years ago. People who are out of work are not using the mall, not buying autos, and that lack of economic activity again has a direct impact on the city because of all the revenue sources. Sales tax is the single highest tax source for the city. Business and leisure travel remains down. This is impacting the city in several ways related to both our TOT tax and also the airport parking tax that we receive through one business here in town. Development and construction has significantly declined throughout the region. This is having an impact on our building permit fees. And while the last item on the list does not have a direct impact on the general fund, the city is grabbing, or the state is grabbing, they are grabbing, unless litigation really will stop them at this point, about $1.9 million from our redevelopment agency. They did enact a provision of Prop 1A where they are taking about $800,000 of our property tax this year, but because through the League of California Cities and with the legislature, a mechanism was designed where bonds could be issued, we are being restored that $800,000. One of the things I might mention, both as it relates to the property tax and the redevelopment, is as the state has really a far bigger budget mess than virtually any individual city does, the ability of the state to get away with taking city monies and redevelopment agency monies, it's one thing if they get away with it one year, but if they get away with it, it will certainly embolden them to do it on a continuing basis. And so that's an issue that I think the City Council needs to follow closely when we look at our own budget. So those economic conditions are leading, again, as I said, property tax revenues have declined. Taxable sales have dropped. Our top 10 businesses in town are down 24% since 2007. Auto dealer sales and the tax we get from auto dealers is down 50% from the same year, and department stores are down about 8%. And again, the hotel tax has been declining over the past 13 months. The City Council, the City of San Bruno, through the City Council, is required to adopt, because of the government code, a balanced budget each year. And what this slide indicates just demonstrates that the City Council does in fact do that. The City Council adopts each and every year without fail a balanced budget. This chart, because there are unknowns and an entire budget, both revenues and expenses are based on estimates, there's never a performance of revenues or expenditures that precisely to the dollar out of $30 or $33 million that hits the target exactly. But this chart shows how close, in actuality, each year of the budget, how close the revenues and expenses are at the end of the year. You see for 9-10, again, the budget proposes, the two lines are on top of each other. The council adopted a balanced budget for 9-10, and the last section of the table there shows that at the mid-year, the projection to the City Council was that general fund expenditures are expected to be minimally above the budget, but you see the steep decline in general fund revenues below what is budgeted, and again, that is the primary issue that brings us here tonight. This chart shows the major categories of general fund revenues, which are taxes, departmental revenues. Departmental revenues are about 20% of the total. It's a very significant part of general fund revenue is the user charges for departmental services. There's allocations and the collection of overhead that comes back into the general fund. And then we have franchise and use of money is combined on this chart. Want to just show generally the very flat nature of all those revenues going all the way back to 2005-06, and you see the decline in taxes very pronounced, flat for between 07-08 and 08-09, and declining in 9-10. And again, we anticipated the decline in tax revenue this year, but the truth is the decline is turning out even worse than had been anticipated. If you look at the chart closely, you see that allocations, and again, this is the collection of overhead and the true spreading of the administrative cost of operations. You see that line again, while it's pretty small, has the most significant increase since 2005-06, and that is really the council policy that overhead charges to the enterprise accounts, to the redevelopment agency are to be collected, and that based on council policy has been a significant contribution to the general fund. This slide, again, is just reflecting sales tax revenue since 05-06, and you can see sales tax has been our single largest revenue source, and in operating this organization, you can just see when the single largest source that we rely on so strongly has this trend. It certainly challenges the council as it goes about balancing the budget. At some point I'll get off sales tax here, but I can't quite leave it yet. To again demonstrate the challenge as it relates to sales tax, I've shown the last 2.5 years and then projecting for the balance of this year. And this is what the city has received in sales tax on a quarterly basis. And you can see since the first quarter, the very beginning of the 07-08 year, you can just see from left to right this significant drop in sales tax revenue. When we were projecting revenue in 9-10 and developing the budget, it was really in the second, third quarter of 08-09. And again, would say in forecasting and projecting what was going to happen with sales tax in 9-10. At that time, we knew there was going to be a decline, but we did not imagine that the decline would be as significant as you're seeing in the out quarters of this year. This chart, going back again to 05-06, shows general fund expenditures, and you can see there was a bit of an uptick between 06-07 and 07-08 in total expenditures, but again, that's dropped off again. Below the total line at the top are various departments. You see the trend for public safety in the middle of the chart. Over the various years. The non-public safety at the bottom of the chart are virtually flat over that 5-year period. And again, that just is a picture of the expenditure trend over the 5 years. More specifically, in preparing the 9-10 budget, if you look at the 08-09 budget for various taxes and those that were most adversely affected, you see between 08-09 budget and what the council adopted in 9-10, you see a drop of about $2.9 million in revenue, property tax $500,000, sales tax a little more than $750,000. The hotel tax down a small amount, $50,000, but you see the significant drop in building and planning permits of over $1.5 million. This represents what the city council factored in as revenue declines in preparing the 9-10 budget, and just want to demonstrate the two right columns. Again, the third column is what the 9-10 budget indicated as total revenues in these areas were to be, and then the right-hand column shows our projection at this point. And so just among those four, you see the budget of $13.3 million. We're now projecting at about $12.3 million. Among these, we're seeing an additional $1 million reduction after the large reduction that was anticipated. The next chart really shows the right two columns from the last slide, but by the various revenue categories that were looked at, and you see again the total revenue loss that we're now projecting in 9-10 for this year is a little over $1 million at $1,035,000, and you can see the various revenue categories where that decline is coming from, and again, the largest category is taxes. this chart has too many numbers to really be able to follow up closely, but again, wanted to just demonstrate again by categories of revenues and by categories of operating expenditures by departments. This shows what the budget was in 9-10, and again, I can't reiterate enough that the 9-10 budget incorporates the large reductions that were required in order to balance the budget. And again, the right-hand column then shows, based on our current estimates, what we expect both the revenues and the expenditures to be. This is a chart that is showing expenditures by classification, and the top line is personnel services. This is going back to 07-08, and as you can see, personnel services here really over the 3 years are flat. If you look at some of the other expenditure categories like supplies and equipment and intergovernmental and contract services, while they are a much smaller amount, they are declining at a greater rate than even our personnel costs, again, that we've been able to maintain with flat expenditures over this period of time. And if you turn back to the previous slide, it actually shows that in the current year, you see that personnel services account for 75% of the general fund budget. You see that supplies and equipment remain at 4%. Contract services have actually reduced from 4% to 3%. There's additional reductions in operations that's related to training and communications, utilities, and so forth. I think the significance of the slide is really that at the council direction, each year, and we've really been doing it for all the time I've been here, but in particular the last number of years, part of the budget process has been to go through line item by line item, and any service or supply or equipment that is absolutely not necessary has been taken out of the budget, and so those numbers are declining, and so it results in, because those are declining and have declined so much, the percentage for personnel services mathematically goes up by the 2 percentage points. The city in the general fund currently has 168 budgeted positions. You can see, and the top part of the chart shows employees that are in other funds. Those are primarily in the enterprise accounts and redevelopment. But again, the lower portion of the bars is the general fund. So we currently have 168 employees. Back in 05-06, there were 184 in the general fund. Going back to the year 2001-2002, there were 208 employees in the general fund. So in the last 9 years, we've actually eliminated 40 positions out of the general fund, and I think the city council would recognize that tremendous effort has been made in order to reduce the number of employees that are in the general fund. And again, that's been, I mean, I think various slides tonight have shown that the trend has been fewer employees. If you just reflect back to the other category, or the last slide, even with the drop-off in the number of employees down to 168 in the general fund, 75% of the general fund is related to personnel costs. So any effort to further reduce expenditures in the general fund really points strongly to personnel services as an area that really needs to be considered if expenditures need to continue to go down, and we need to maintain a balanced budget. This slide is just comparing on a line graph revenues, general fund revenues, general fund tax revenues, and the number of employees. Wanted to just point out to the council, based on their actions, the total revenues in the city in general fund revenues have not changed dramatically since 2005-06. There was an uptick in 07-08, but it's been declining since then. Even our tax revenues, for the most part, are much flatter with the drop-off now. But the council's direction and the actions of the council have really led, despite what might have been one-year increases in revenues, there has been that steady decline in the number of employees, that even when additional revenue has been available, it has not been translated into additional employees, that the direction of the council has been a continuing compressing of the workforce represented in the city's general fund.
As Jim has indicated and provided you with the historic review of the effects of the continuing economic downturn on the city of San Bruno in every year over the past several years, the City Council has directed, and the budget has reflected specific guidance. And more specifically, that guidance, that direction from the City Council has been that the city will live within its means. It will balance the operating budget with operating revenues that are expected, in large measure at least, to continue and to be sustainable for the continuing costs of delivering city services. Just to summarize the specific direction that was provided by the City Council for the development and approval of the 2009-10 budget, and obviously this slide, you have seen this before, had several components. First, the adoption of a balanced budget. That balance would not be achieved by the use of reserve funds. That we would develop the budget around a policy for the maintenance of a minimum reserve balance and the prudent use of reserves. Employee compensation would be frozen through June 30th of 2010. The establishment of a budget working group among employees to evaluate and recommend budget and service level reductions. And we were tasked with the development of strategies to increase revenues. All of those direction points were met in the development of the budget and continuing as through tonight. Reductions in specifically that were incorporated into the 9-10 budget and which continue are identified and detailed on the information that's in front of you. In total, nearly $2.7 million was reduced by comparison between the 2008-2009 and the 9-10 budget. The largest single component of that reduction resulted from elimination of 10.5 full-time positions in the city workforce. Again, $2.7 million. What it represents the reductions that were incorporated and which continue, lowering the platform for the basic general fund budget. Turning for a moment to reserves and the City Council's, the beginning of the development of a City Council policy related to reserves. The bars on the right represent the total general fund operating budget in each of the past several years. The bar on the left, in the color purple, represents the general fund reserve. What you see is a gradual increase in the reserve balance and a relative stabilization of the amount, the total, the proportion of the general fund that is represented by the reserves. What you see between the bars on the 2008, 2009, and 2009-10 is the same level of reserves. In fact, the reserves have not changed much since 2006-07, as depicted on the chart. What has changed is the amount of the general fund operating budget, and in particular, with a declining general fund and a stable reserve amount, the proportion, the percentage that the reserves represent increases slightly. It is generally accepted standard, prudent municipal practice that a city maintain a reserve fund of between 15 and 20% of its general fund operating budget. Cities differ all over the map in terms of the way that reserves funds are managed and the establishment of reserves for different types of programs or operating contingencies. In this city, as the council is well aware, there is an equipment reserve, both for the general fund as well as for the enterprises. And that equipment reserve has been a very valuable and useful tool in assuring that the city has ready access to funds that do not need to be programmed in the annual general fund operating budget or which are not needing to utilize ongoing revenues for one-time purposes. And we have been very successful in maintaining an adequate equipment reserve and utilizing those funds for the intended purpose. Those funds are not depicted in the purple bar that represents the general fund reserve. This reserve is intended for a variety of purposes and is, as I indicated, a necessary component of an overall and prudent financial management strategy for a city like ours. In summary, among the many reasons that an adequate general fund reserve needs to be maintained includes the eventual need for capital improvement and replacement of city facilities, disaster recovery, litigation, and other uninsured losses, economic disaster, and excess workers' compensation claims. These are a few among the many different types of situations that could impact the city's ability to sustain itself financially. In particular, for the city of San Bruno, I would note that the general fund does not have any designated funds that are earmarked for the capital improvement and replacement of critical city facilities, including, as an example, our fire stations, our police station, our civic center, our city hall, our library, our recreation center. As the City Council is aware, with only one exception, those facilities are all in the 50-plus-year-old range, the one exception being our relatively new police facility. They require attention. They will require replacement and/or significant renovation at some time in the future. This city has no designated reserve funds or funds readily available for those expensive contingencies. We've talked for many years now about the opportunity, the desire, the real need for replacement of our aged library facility. And again, I need not remind the City Council of the fact that, in fact, that we have no resources available to legitimately fund such a necessary endeavor. Moving quickly to the meat of tonight's presentation, or what I would consider to be the most important part of the discussion tonight, is the comprehensive recommendation for addressing the $1.37 million shortfall in the current year's budget. And the first thing I'd like to just reiterate is Administrative Service Director O'Leary's earlier comment that in fact this $1.37 million shortfall results not from a failure to adhere to the budgeted expenditure requirements or to the City Council's prudent budget philosophy. It occurs from the loss of expected general fund revenues. And again, I would remind the council and the public that in fact our projections for revenues this year were reduced significantly from prior years, and the loss that we are currently experiencing is in addition to already reduced revenue estimates. In order to address the $1.3 million shortfall, I'm recommending several different strategies. First is additional line item expenditure reductions in the amount of $150,000. Those expenditure reductions come to my recommendation as a result of careful review with every department of areas where either budgeted expenditures need not be made, or where it is anticipated that costs either have or will come in at a lower amount than what was originally budgeted. In particular, they come from lower than anticipated costs for the conduct of the November general municipal election, additional reductions in recruitment and training expenses, recruitment expenses being reduced even further as a result of the very much lower than average recruitment activity. Salary savings from vacant positions. The City Council will recall that we balanced the current year's budget with an expectation of a modest amount of salary savings. There was actually a line item in the budget that represented $130,000 to be taken as salary savings. We have met that objective as articulated in the budget adoption process, and anticipate a very modest amount of additional salary savings from vacant positions that we did not at the beginning of the year anticipate. And lastly, City Council is aware of ongoing discussions moving towards implementation of an opportunity to expand our shared services relationship with the City of Millbrae, this time by sharing police chief services, which we have included a modest amount in this $150,000 as representation of a reduced cost, actually a revenue coming in to offset a budgeted expenditure for police chief services for at least a portion of the remainder of this fiscal year. We have had some small amounts of additional revenue that were not budgeted that we anticipate being fully received by the end of this year. The $65,000 amount represents reimbursements primarily from task force participation through the police department, the gang task force, the narcotics task force, the criminal justice department grant, as well as reimbursement for services provided to security at the Century Cinemas. Additionally, I am very pleased to report that our work to grow our recreation program revenues has begun to pay off, although we have for the last couple of years reduced our revenue expectations for recreation programs. We are estimating that revenues will exceed our budget this year by approximately $100,000. An additional $10,000 is anticipated as the net, and this is not good news. An additional $10,000 is anticipated as the net amount of the successful ballot measure to increase the TOT by the transient occupancy tax by 2%. The council will recall that we anticipated and suggested that a 2% increase in the TOT might generate as much as $250,000 annual, or $125,000 for half of a year. That increase took effect January 1st, and the $10,000 represents the net between the additional decline in TOT that has been experienced over the past 6 months and is projected through the end of this year, and the amount that we would expect to receive as a result of the 2% increase. So in effect, the 2% increase has allowed us to stay even with what we might have expected in transient occupancy tax. Those two categories represent what I would suggest to you is our strategies that are fully consistent with the City Council's continuing direction that the budget be balanced against ongoing revenues. I'm going to step out a bit here and suggest to you that the current economic and budget situation requires our consideration, and I am recommending to you tonight that we use for this year some amounts of one-time revenue, and I'll explain the specifics of those items that are listed on the chart in front of you. I just, for those who are trying to follow along, I would just point out that we will be distributing to you in a moment a very complicated chart which details the material that I'm talking to you about. So partly I think this will highlight the complexity of this issue just by the need for us to actually explain and walk this through with you when we distribute it in a few moments. One-time revenues, I am proposing that we give serious consideration to a measure which has not been utilized previously to balance our budget, and that is a use of a portion of the overall development impact fee that the city is receiving from the development of the crossing project. In particular, the SNK residential complex has its portion of the total $1 million development impact fee that's been paid over the many years that the crossing project has been in progress. SNK's portion of that development impact fee is $300,000, and that's based roughly on the site, the proportion of the overall crossing site that is represented by that particular development. This payment has recently been received by the city. It represents an amount that was negotiated with the original crossing developers and was intended to provide funding for a variety of different potential impacts of the project that might occur over the life of the project. The funds from the development impact fee are not earmarked or allocated for any specific purpose and would otherwise be placed into the reserve fund. The development agreement with the crossing project, and as one of the things that Mr. O'Leary pointed out earlier, is one of the areas of our revenue decline that has had a substantial impact on the current year's budget is that we will not be collecting a significant amount of the budgeted revenues for building-related activity. As the council may recall, the crossing development is subject to building permit fees that were based on the schedule that was in effect at the time the project was approved, I believe in 2002. Those building fee amounts are substantially lower than would otherwise be collected if the project was entitled today, and represents something of an impact to the city. Again, the $300,000 was not necessarily intended to be a compensation for building permit fees, but I'm recommending your consideration tonight of the one-time use of those fees as a means simply of stabilizing and balancing the budget for the current year. Moving to the next item, repayment of the redevelopment loan from the general fund. The council may recall that the redevelopment agency, through its initial years of startup prior to its generation of sufficient tax increment revenue to cover its ongoing regular annual operating costs, utilized borrowing from the general fund and from the general fund reserve in order to sustain its operations. There remains a very small amount, $200,700, that was directly borrowed from the general fund. I'll come in a moment to, there remains a larger amount, $3.2 million, which represents a loan from the equipment reserve to the redevelopment agency. But in this particular case, I'm talking about the $200,000 that is the last remaining amount that was borrowed directly from the general fund. A repayment of that amount could be made. It is a strictly one-time amount that will not be repeated, cannot be repeated in future years. Next, the consideration of the $3.2 million loan from the general fund equipment reserve to the redevelopment agency. Over the past 2 to 3 years, we have discussed with the City Council annually at the budget adoption study sessions and in consideration of the development of the annual budget, the fact that the equipment reserve, we believe, and have demonstrated over the past several years, is being adequately funded to address the city's reasonable short and longer term needs for equipment funding and equipment purchases. That said, there is an approximate balance of $3 million of cash available in the general fund equipment reserve. Is that correct? 2.4 million. And a note receivable, if you will, of $3.2 million from the redevelopment agency. This recommendation would initiate repayment of that loan on a scheduled basis over whatever period of time the City Council might desire, but with a very modest initial payment of $250,000 for the current year to assist in balancing the current year's budget. Lastly, and I say this as I have said the previous two items with some amount of hesitation, this one with a greater amount of concern for our adherence to your budget management and budget balancing policy, and that is the use of just under $300,000 from the general fund reserve. And I want to explain briefly why I believe that that is a prudent use of the general fund reserve and what that means on a going forward basis. First, as I indicated before, there is a balance of approximately $6 million in the general fund reserve. That represents between 18 and 20% of the general fund operating budget, not a not a too large amount. In other words, the reserves could certainly be increased. That said, this amount of $298,000 does not significantly affect the overall health and stability of the general fund reserve as it relates to the overall general fund balance. As a long-term strategy, your staff clearly understands and appreciates the City Council's direction that general fund reserves not be used on an ongoing basis to balance ongoing general fund operations and expenditures. And it's with that in mind that on a going forward basis, our recommendations for stabilizing the general fund and moving into next year relies on a much more serious reduction of general fund operating expenses. And it's at this point that I'd like to distribute the chart that Mr. O'Leary has prepared and talk to you about a couple of additional strategies that are identified on this chart that are primarily intended on a looking forward basis. While Mr. O'Leary is distributing the table, just in very general terms, I've had the opportunity to hear a number of economic forecasts over the past several weeks as I have participated with the League of California Cities and in other venues to understand and prepare for what this economic climate is likely to mean to the city of San Bruno over the next year and into the future. In every venue, what economic forecasters are indicating is that while there are periodic improvements in various economic sectors and some light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, that economic recovery will occur over a period of time in the future, no major recovery is predicted for the near term and in particular over the next fiscal year. The state of California is continuing to expect the need to look to city revenues over the fiscal year 10-11, and we are continuing to project that while it's anticipated that sales taxes and property taxes will stabilize, that there is no immediate projection for those critical revenue sources to demonstrate the type of increase that would be necessary in order to avoid additional measures to balance the coming year's budget. With that in mind, I am recommending that we look to two basic strategies. The first is, and let me say first of all that next year's budget, as I think should be intuitive to those that understand how the city's revenues and expenditures work. If this $1.3 million problem is not fully resolved, it continues into next year and has to be resolved next year. In effect, the use of one-time resources does not fully resolve on a going forward basis the problem that is represented by this $1.3 million. So that's where we have addressed the problem begins at the top of the page to the tune of about $325,000. So for round number purposes, we're looking at a shortfall in the $1 million plus range moving into next year. With that in mind, I recommended earlier the establishment of a repayment schedule for the redevelopment loan to the equipment reserve. I would continue to recommend that as a strategy for next year's budget. In addition to that, I believe that it is going to be necessary to even more significantly reduce the city's workforce, in addition to maintaining the total package of reductions that has already been implemented and remains in effect for the current year. The chart in front of you indicates a number of $600,000. That is a very, very rough and very early estimate of the order of magnitude that I'm anticipating. That relies on an assumption that as much as $400,000 could be achieved with the repayment of the redevelopment loan on an annual basis for approximately 8 to 10 years. $600,000 again is an early and rough number. It represents a significant reduction to the city's workforce of between 6 and 8 employee positions. In addition, as the City Council has previously directed and has been recommended very strongly through the Employee Budget Working Group, the continuing need to explore the establishment of new ongoing revenue sources is part of the recommendation. At this point, I'm looking at the far right-hand column of the chart that you have in front of you. The one comment that I need to make before I suggest the detail of the chart that we've distributed is that there is no significant new revenue opportunity that I have been able to identify or can credibly recommend to you that would generate revenues as early as fiscal year 2010-11. There are, in all cases, where new revenues of this magnitude, or actually of any magnitude, increases to taxes or the establishment of assessment district or the like, is implemented. In any case that such of a strategy is implemented, there are voter and/or property owner approval requirements that require an extended timeline for consideration and establishment of such a new revenue. On the chart in front of you, you see 3 potential strategies. Some or all of these have been used by communities in our vicinity. A benefit assessment district. Benefit assessment district is a relatively flexible mechanism which is implemented via a Proposition 218 compliant property owner protest process. Can be utilized to cover lighting and landscaping costs for those types of improvements and maintenance requirements throughout the community. Other communities have used a public safety benefit district. It is a mechanism that can be used for some limited variety of purposes, and again requires a property owner protest process. That is a mechanism that I think has the most potential benefit for the city of San Bruno, and that's the reason that particular item is highlighted in yellow. That is a preliminary recommendation for your consideration, and I've included on the chart a couple of other items that, as the City Council is well aware, require voter approval at a municipal election. Those being an increase to the sales tax, a difficult concept in the current economic environment, and one which would be subject to the fluctuation, obviously, in the basic sales tax collection opportunity. Lastly, a utility user tax, which is essentially a voter-approved tax that could be applied to utility services, including one or several of water, wastewater, power and electricity, phone service, and even cable television service. A percentage of the total utility bill is subject then to, the total utility bill is subject to a percentage amount of tax, which is often 5%, but is subject to the City Council's decision-making and to voter approval. I think at this point, I will conclude the presentation. I realize that the chart is a little bit complex. If you have questions about that, we're happy to answer it, but I think I've covered in general terms the variety of items, both for the near term as well as for the longer term, that I think have the most merit for your consideration, and staff is interested and anxious to hear the City Council's discussion and to receive any comment and direction the Council is prepared to provide tonight.
All right, thank you, Connie and Jim. I'd like to ask the City Council now if they have any preliminary comments on what we've heard, and then I'd like to open it up to the public and the employees that are here this evening, and then give it back to the Council for some more discussion. So if that's all right with everybody, I have a couple of points. So what you're talking about is 18 months, not just finishing up this year.
I'm talking about at least 18 months. I wish the crystal ball was clearer, but yes, that is correct.
And then we also, and it really wasn't mentioned, I don't believe, have a big PERS hit anticipated. Any feeling for what that is and when that'll come?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was something that I meant to mention earlier. Even as the city is working very aggressively to contain expenditures in all categories, it is the case that there are increases which occur over the years. One of the things we're contractually obligated in some cases to modest changes in employee compensation and benefits costs. In other cases, we are subject to the rate evaluations that you've specifically asked about PERS retirement costs. Every year, our rate is evaluated based on actuarials that PERS conducts, and we are given advance notice of the rate in October going forward, and on a even further ahead basis, PERS does provide us with estimates of the rate going into the future 2 years hence. The most recent information that we have, and just backtrack a moment to identify that, again, the Council is well aware that the PERS system is funded largely by investment earnings on the resources that PERS collects, both from employees as well as from employers, to fund retirement benefits for public sector employees. The PERS has advised us that our rates will increase significantly beginning July of 2011 in response primarily to the losses that PERS experienced in their investment portfolio. Unfortunately, fortunately, I guess, there's a lag in the impact to the rates of economic circumstances, in this case, the investment losses that occurred, so that there's a delayed effect, which on the one hand gives agencies the opportunity to plan and prepare. On the other hand, can represent a very extreme cost burden. We are anticipating an impact that we have roughly calculated as at approximately $300,000 in increased PERS costs to take effect July of 2011 as a result of those circumstances.
All right, thank you. On the one-time revenue for the SNK Development Impact Fee, you said that would have gone to the reserve fund?
Because it is not otherwise designated, at this point, actually our reserves, we have them in two different places. One of them is an account that we simply put funds that are otherwise undesignated and are not therefore earmarked for a specific purpose. We segregate them into a one-time reserve. So that's where that money would have gone. It could obviously be used for any purpose that the City Council determines and should have some relationship to the impacts of the crossing project in very general terms.
Okay. Assuming the state gets their grubby little hands on our redevelopment money, and we're talking about taking money out of the, paying back the redevelopment fund and moving that, what is that going to have to do with the picture that you're printing here?
Currently, we are anticipating a 2-year impact of the state's decision to take redevelopment funds. For the current year, that represents approximately $1.9 million that is scheduled to be paid to the state in May of this year. That represents, after you net out all of the pass-throughs and housing set-aside costs to the redevelopment agency, of a net, that is essentially the net amount that the agency would otherwise have received and made available for projects. At this point, it's uncertain as to what the result of the litigation will be and what the effect of that litigation will be on the state's actual take of that money. But that take, we are fortunate, would not affect the current balance of redevelopment funds that have been accrued over the last several years. And
so those
balance,
amounts, we'd still be able to pay those amounts back, $450,000.
Yes. The problem is that that amount, assuming a continuation of the take by the state, would simply represent a diminished ability for the redevelopment agency to fund other projects that the council, the agency, may wish to undertake on a going forward basis.
Right.
We have a balance of approximately $4 million in the redevelopment fund, which would not be increased this year if we have to pay the 1.9 to the state.
So that would be reduced by 1.9 million in addition to 450,000.
The $4 million would not be reduced. That balance would remain. The $1.9 million would be current year income, would simply go out.
All right.
To
and
the state.
It's my understanding that the pass-throughs still exist, even if we don't keep our money, we still have to pass through the amounts to the districts. And the
That's
school.
correct.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other council discussion at this time? All right. Yes, Michael.
Can you clarify what the impact fee would normally be used for? And given the maturity of the project, if you could just maybe give us an idea of how likely it is that we might need to have some money on hand for an impact.
Yeah. Answer the second question first. I do not have any information that would suggest that there is an impact out there that we would need to fund directly. This is a more general type of development impact fee that is typically collected at the outset of development as This one has been collected over a period of time as the project has unfolded and been developed. In particular, it represents amounts that might otherwise have been collected for a park and lieu fee, for example. No park and lieu fee was collected from the crossing development. If the city had an impact fee related, which we don't, related to traffic and circulation improvements or street maintenance, that we might fund the effects of more cars driving on streets, for example. Those are the types of things that impact fees typically fund. And again, this amount and the total amount of the impact fee that we've collected from the crossing project has not been earmarked, and all but $100,000, which the City Council has recently identified for use to facilitate the development of the restaurant at the crossing, which is currently in progress. The remainder of that amount, correct me if I'm wrong, the remainder of the $1 million impact fee collected over time from the crossing project has not been designated or spent.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments? All right, at this time, I'd like to open it up to the employees that are here and the public that's here. If you'd like to step to the microphone. If you're a member of the public, please state your street name and your name. And we are live on cable, so for the benefit of those people watching, I'd like any employees that wish to speak to state your name and the department you're with. So who wants to start off?
George Lindor, Fire Department. In other communities I've been aware of, they have public safety impact fees, so I was curious if some of the fees could be applied towards the public safety budgeting.
Thank you.
Steve Freitas, Park Department. I know that the city manager mentioned that due in July 2011, there'll be an increase of approximately $300,000 needing to be paid to PERS. I assume this question, and then I have a few more comments, is that just on the current employees at that time? Is that how it's calculated, or do they go back so many years and you have to pay a certain amount for employees that are no longer on the books, or is it just calculated for those employees on the books at that time?
Okay, why don't you make your statements and your question, ask your
okay.
questions, and then what we'll do is we'll try to answer them all at the same time.
And if so, then if it's on just the current employees, there are going to be some employees that might retire by the time July 2011 comes around. That will be a reduction in the cost. And secondly, if some of those employees are replaced at the two-tier system where it's negotiated that their PERS aren't at the same level, that may bring the cost down. And maybe there's a possibility, I know in business, if you need a piece of equipment, it's an expenditure right up front, but in the long run, you save money a year down the line. And I know this has been brought up in the past to maybe create an incentive for employees that are on the cusp of retirement. Maybe spend $1 now to save 10 in a year from now. And that's just a minimal fund. And secondly, my understanding is that most cities do not have RDAs, redevelopment agencies. So are those cities exempt from being robbed this big amount of money that San Bruno is being asked to fork over? And that's my questions. Thank you.
My name is Hank. I live on Fasman Drive. And I've been looking at some papers, and going to increase taxes, sales tax, utility tax, is a bad idea. There's a lot of people hurting today. And yet, whoever comes out with a new tax is a no-brainer. This city has made some bad mistakes. The police station, I think we're paying $50,000 a month. Am I correct in that?
Well, we'll get an answer for you.
Okay, $50,000 a month for 30 years, but after 15 years, the contract is supposed to be renegotiated. Also, in the last couple of years, you had a high official in San Bruno getting a personal loan of over $100,000. Also, you had a city employee buy a house. They couldn't keep up the payments, so the city bought the house. Anyways, for 2008, I have some overtime. Do you know you have put over, I'm just guessing now, $3 million in overtime in 2008? Do you know one firefighter put in $72,000 in overtime? God! How about a policeman? 70,000 bucks. Overtime alone. Is that person really efficient with all those hours on overtime? Either that, the job is real easy. I mean, I can't believe it, especially the firefighters are putting in astronomical amounts of overtime. I'd like to know how much overtime was spent in 2009. Overtime is what's killing everything. And maybe higher management, to set an example, can take a pay cut. Maybe 10 or 15%. I don't hear any of that thrown out. Certain officials make good money. And times are rough, and we all have to eat a little dirt. So please think about this payroll and try to reduce the payroll, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
John Barrelier, North San Anselmo. Please consider this a formal request for a complete list of those water department, police department, and fire department employees who earned more than 20% of their gross 2009 salaries through overtime pay. Please include all names, their overtime, and gross pay. Did you receive that letter? I mailed it several days ago. You were supposed to have gotten it.
Not yet.
I'd like to comment about last year's. He already did. The high person last year, 2008, was 72,048. You had 23 people who made over $25,000 a year in overtime last year. 7 made $14,000 a month or more. I'd like to recommend a cap on the overtime, that you consider a cap on the overtime. I'd like to recommend an outside audit of San Bruno overtime for the last 3 years. I'm still sold on GPS for every city vehicle. You should know where your vehicles are and if they're working. They're emblazoned with your city emblems on the side of them, and if they're sitting there for hours with no work being done, something's wrong. Are you sure you're getting what you're paying for in labor costs? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name's Tony. I live on Elm. I was on the San Bruno Beacon. I took a look at that for the first time. And, okay, I've read in the newspaper that we're now going to share, possibly, our chief of police with San Bruno and Millbrae. I don't understand how at least 20 firemen made more than our chief of police did with their overtime. So you're going to split a man between 2 cities, and yet the fire department makes more in overtime than he does. No labor pools. I worked for union jobs. We had labor pools that we pulled from. Instead of putting somebody on overtime, you were able to pull from them to bring in more labor. Also, that labor pool in time of a crisis, you have other bodies that aren't per se, you're paying the pensions and those types of things, but you have someplace else to pull from instead of, basically giving overtime across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We're looking for ideas. Council discussion. Let me ask staff first to see if we can answer some of these questions. Public safety impact fee, can you comment on that?
Yes. I'm not aware of an ongoing impact fee for public safety other than what I mentioned earlier, the benefit assessment format for an ongoing coverage of public safety costs. The City of Millbrae, for example, currently operates a benefit assessment district that is dedicated to providing funding for fire services, and as an example, other communities have done something similar. An impact fee typically is a one-time fee that is taken typically from development. So otherwise, I'm not aware of any mechanism other than the benefit assessment district type of configuration, and that certainly is an option.
Okay, that's something we should check out. How about calculation of PERS, current, future? How does that work?
Right. PERS bases their calculations on actuarials that they conduct periodically. So the change, as Mr. Freitas suggested, when somebody goes out of the system, it can have an effect, but it's pretty typical that your employee base, unless you're having a declining employee, a declining number of employees covered through the PERS system, it's pretty typical that the overall amount of the payroll, if the amount of the payroll doesn't fluctuate too much, your rate remains fairly stable or increases as a result of extraneous factors such as the investment losses. Again, PERS funds their retirement benefits that they pay through employer contributions, employee contributions, which are fixed at a certain percentage amount of payroll. And jumping backwards to employer contributions, that amount fluctuates based on the need that PERS calculates through its actuarial, and then lastly through its investment earnings. So those are the three sources of revenue to fund employee retirement benefits, and there can be some fluctuation based on employees coming in and out of the workforce, but typically we don't see a lot of variation by an employee retiring. Doesn't by itself, or a handful of employees retiring doesn't have a measurable effect on the city's overall cost for PERS. Mr. Freitas, if I might continue, did make a couple of interesting points that actually I should have talked about earlier. He referenced a two-tier system for PERS retirement, and in general terms, this is something that I would further recommend to the City Council. It's shown on the spreadsheet that you have in front of you. In short, a two-tier system is simply the level of the benefit that is provided to current employees being changed so that new employees coming in are provided with a formula for their retirement benefit calculation that is at a lower level than is currently provided to the city workforce. That is something that the City Council has previously discussed briefly. It is a strategy that I recommend strongly for your consideration. It is one that could not be implemented without the meet and confer process, the negotiations process with our employee bargaining units, even though its effect would be entirely on employees who have not yet been hired by the city, but who might be hired by the city in the future. The primary thing that, the primary caveat I would make is that while I think it's an important strategy, it is not even a near-term benefit or savings for the city. It is that savings would only occur in the long term. And by long term, I mean 5+ years and probably closer to 10 years, depending on essentially what has to happen is that the workforce transition would need to occur over a period of time to the point where you have more people hired recently than you have longer tenured employees, and specifically employees, if you had that system in place right now, persons employed from today forward would need to then become the greater proportion of the workforce before you would start to see a measurable impact on the PERS rates. Still something that I strongly recommend as a long-term strategy for the city. If I might continue, Mr. Freitas further recommended incentive for employees on the cusp of retirement. That is something that I would also recommend as part of an overall strategy for reducing the number of general fund employees, as I have strongly recommended to you as a primary strategy for reducing costs into 2010-11 and beyond. He had one more question regarding redevelopment. Yes, cities who do not have a redevelopment agency are not going to experience takeaway from the states grabbing redevelopment resources, because that will be only against redevelopment agencies.
Right. The other side of that is they don't have agencies, so they don't have redevelopment. There's a lot of things
Correct.
that they can't do that we are in fact doing. The unfortunate thing with redevelopment is to take so long to develop the actual money in the bank. And we're sitting here at about 11 years now with redevelopment, and we have a few $1 million there. And we've initiated facade improvement programs, some other things in the city here. But after a little while, with tax revenues being somewhat stable, we're going to have quite a bit of money to do quite a few things. And our agency, was really thought out well. We have the Skycrest area is all redevelopment, all El Camino Real, all downtown. And we were lucky enough to get Tanforan and the crossing in redevelopment. So when those funds start to come in, they'll be substantial, and there are things we can do in that area that are going to be positive that other cities that don't have agencies, and it's virtually impossible now, I understand, to get a redevelopment agency started that other cities don't have. So.
And if I could just add to
Yes.
that, there is no relationship between the revenues that are received by a redevelopment agency and might be taken by the state and revenues that are in the city's general fund. Those are entirely separate. There is no deficit in the city's, in the San Bruno Redevelopment Agency Fund at the current time.
Right, but those are restricted and used in certain
Correct.
areas. Right. Hank talked about, in general, taxes being a bad idea. Half the city, when we had it on the ballot, thought it was a good idea. Half the city thought it wasn't for the sales tax increase. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. The police station, I don't know, you might talk to a lot of officers. When we did that, we made some big monetary steps, in fact, to work along with BART and the BART police to develop a new station, because they were living in squalor there, frankly, in the basement of City Hall, unable to sometimes hold prisoners. So it was a huge step. We made this step, and I think it's worked out for our department, and the cooperation with BART has worked out very well for the city. So you can say what you want, but it's done. Yes, we do have some payments. Yeah, we do have some payments every month to do, and that's correct.
50,030 years.
Right. Yes, Irene?
Next door.
Okay, wait a minute.
Oh, I just want to remind people that is redevelopment money.
Right.
That is not, the money that was used to build and is still used to pay back the loans for the police station is redevelopment money. It is not general fund money.
Correct.
So if we did not use this money that we used to pay the people and do the other services, we used redevelopment money for that. So that $50,000 or whatever the amount is does not affect this general fund. So it's not taken from it.
Right, and staff can comment, but I know Hank and John, I'll put the two of you together, really complained about the overtime issues with the city. And I know that John before had asked for a spreadsheet on all of the wages and overtime rates for the city. And if you want to put that in formal writing, give it to the clerk, we'll see that you get it under the Information Act. It's available to you. But I will say that a lot of the fire department overtime had to do and was reimbursed because of strike force teams that had to go to other areas of the state with a huge disaster relief for forest fires. And so it's not all San Bruno money. What they made in a dangerous job, in a dangerous position, but that was reimbursed by the state of California for those men that were sent. And so it's not all, don't look at it at all as San Bruno money paying people to work overtime. I know that Tony talked about shared services. I have a union shop myself, but the fire department and police department don't have a hiring hall. We have mutual aid. So when in fact you have to backfill and bring people in, and you pull an alarm in San Bruno, you could get a Central County truck, you get a Millbury truck, you get a South City truck, and the same thing is true for the other cities. So it's a nice idea, and I understand, you know, we try to work this city as a business, but unfortunately sometimes it just doesn't work that way.
So is it okay for a fireman to go out and get another job on top of that? You only work 10, 11 days?
If you want to ask a question, do it at the microphone so people can hear you. But the question was, is it okay for a fireman to get another job? I suppose it's okay for anybody in the city to get another job, and maybe a lot of people do it. So it has to do with hours worked and things, and that's the way it is. I don't know if staff wants to comment on some of those things.
Just to say that staffing a 24/7 operation for the critical public safety functions that we provide through our police department and our fire department does require, as I think the City Council is well aware, a modest, minimal, at the minimum, it requires a modest use of overtime. There is really only the choice between staffing with fixed costs for your maximum exposure, understanding that police and firefighters, dedicated as they are, still are entitled to and do have vacation time. They get sick from time to time. They have other duties and responsibilities that do take them away from the 24/7 response requirements that their position is largely responsible for. So there are a number of issues, and we make a constant evaluation to evaluate the most cost-effective way of staffing for the 24/7 operational requirements of this community. That includes monitoring overtime. Your chiefs are under strict orders from me, and they respond responsibly to ongoing and detailed evaluation of the use of overtime. So I would simply submit to you that operating the operation that we do in the most cost-effective manner requires use of overtime. Mr. Belair has requested, we have received his request in writing for 2009 information attributable to the 2009 use of overtime. We received that this week. He will receive that information within the 10 days that Public Records Act requires us to respond. That information is in the process of being compiled.
Okay, and Hank did talk about pay cuts for management. I know where management stands on that. I wouldn't expect management to take any higher or lower percentage pay cuts than anybody else would. They take the same furlough days as everyone else, and I've had discussions with the manager about what else we might be able to do in that respect. So those discussions are ongoing, and they're part of this whole strategy. Any other comments?
Well, if I might just respond to a couple of comments that Hank made, alluding to a personal loan being provided to an employee in the amount of over $100,000. That is absolutely something that I am fully and completely unaware of. If it exists, I do not believe that that is accurate information. He also identified a situation where the city purchased a house. That is correct. The city did do that. The city did do that out of a careful evaluation and a prudent, responsible protection of the city resources, and that house is continuing to be owned by the city and will be sold at the earliest possible time when the market recovers.
And those payments to that individual, from that individual, are being made in a timely manner?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Any other comments, employees? All right, City Council. Who would like to start off? Vice Mayor Medina.
I'm still processing.
Michael.
One of the things I've been involved with several times in the private sector is analyzing efficiency of how businesses run. And I'm curious as to how San Bruno compares to neighboring cities or similar cities in terms of what we expend per capita for services. While I was at the Council of Cities workshop, they had some generic guidelines in terms of what they perceived a city spends on certain services, and public safety is understandably the largest chunk of most cities' expenditure, and the same is true here in San Bruno. But we are probably near the upper limit of what was presented there, and I know that there are certainly, being in the Bay Area where we are an expensive place to live, there are some circumstances that possibly other cities in the state don't have to face. So I don't know that anything has been looked at recently, but I'm wondering if staff has some idea of how we compare, or any thoughts on those comments?
Actually, if I might respond, we occasionally that type of information comes to my attention, and most recently, I'll respond specifically to what you just said in a moment. Specifically, there has been extensive amount of work done within our county as an initiative of the City Managers Group countywide to compile and compare both numbers of employees, range of services, costs for services, compared, and the typical comparison is made, for example, number of police officers per thousand population, or cost of services per thousand residents. I'd be very interested in I probably have the information that you just talked about, but I would be very interested in taking a closer look at that, because comparisons that I have seen, and particularly those within our county, demonstrate pretty consistently that San Bruno is at or near the bottom of numbers, for example, numbers of police officers per thousand population. Now, those are very rough and very broad types of analyses that do not take into consideration a broad variety of different types of factors that might include the costs of services in any particular regional area, that might include the need to address certain specific crime or other types of service requirements within a community. But yes, those are interesting, and in many cases it can be valid benchmarks against which you might reasonably look to compare services and evaluate, number one, what is the reason for differences, and number two, what might other people be doing that we might want to consider. And again, just to be redundant, I have not seen anything that demonstrates that San Bruno is out of whack, and certainly not at the costly or extreme end of the comparison scale. Always interested in seeing that type of information.
Thank you.
Anything else, Michael?
Not right now.
Okay.
I'm still digesting as well, but I'm wondering how much beyond sharing police and fire captains or chiefs that we've looked at with Millbrae, have we looked at sharing things with the school district per se? I know we do some of their lawn maintenance and things like that, but are there other things that we could share or do together that would be more cost efficient? Are we looking at loaning out or kind of hiring out some of our things that we do very well to other cities that don't? And I don't know what this would be exactly, but that's kind of on the top of my head. The other thing, we have the fantastic senior center. Have we looked at using it for things other than what we do now? I don't know. I know we had at one time library hours on Sundays, and we had to cut that. And I know we've shortened some of our other library hours. Is there something that we could do to share with another city, again, with libraries and things like that? That's all I have right now. I can't think of anything. Oh, and just as a caveat to what Michael was saying, Mr. Medina and I happened to be at a 4-H presentation day, and there were 3 gentlemen from other cities, and one other city that has a population that is half as big as ours has 3 administrative people. They have a city manager, assistant city manager, and another assistant to the assistant city manager. So
We don't get Connie ideas.
I just want people to know we have. Yeah, what city is that? We have 1 city manager. That's it. And so we are pretty lean in me, and I have seen statistics comparing what our services are and how many people we have. There's always efficiencies, but we do compare fairly well.
It looks like the vice mayor is digested, so you ready?
Well, none of this is good, but here's some of, and may correct me, Mr. Leary, if I'm wrong. Concerns I have is that we are looking at various ways of repaying. So we're going to repay the equipment reserve fund, which is then going to go into the general fund. We're going to redevelopment's going to repay $200,000, which is going to go in the general fund. In essence, these are monies that were borrowed out of the general fund, out of the equipment reserve fund. So to me, this isn't really addressing the issue, because in essence, we're just repaying back what was borrowed. In the equipment reserve, my concern is that we've already somewhat, through the staff's doing a great job as far as making equipment last longer, not purchasing stuff in a timely fashion, and just repairing it until it just doesn't work anymore. And I think we've already reduced our allocations to the equipment reserve in the last budget cycle, if I'm not mistaken, because we felt we were doing pretty good. Concern is you keep taking from that, and then when the need arises, will we not have that equipment reserve fund as well as we need to have it to address the equipment needs, and that's why it was established. So to me, we're using one-time reserve, even though we're paying from redevelopment. To me, that is still a reserve. We're basically paying back what was borrowed, but now we're taking that. So to me, it's almost coming out in some way out of the same pot. The concern is on some of these items for advanced revenue. It's unpredictable. You can hope, we can wish, but hope is not a plan, and that's not a commitment. I have a concern of budgeting on future items until they are actually implemented. Had we, for the sales tax, counted on that money, and then it didn't come to fruition, we would be in trouble, but we didn't do that. Same with the TOT tax. Here, the TOT tax, we'd hope for $100,000 in the first 6 months or so, but in essence, we're staying about status quo up about 10. So that's why I'm saying you can't count on it until you have it. We have already a reduction in the general fund of 40 personnel. Where do you go? How much more do you give? What services do you stop? These are, like I said before, hard questions to ask and tough decisions to be made. But I also personally have a concern when we having to look to these reductions in the first responders in public safety. Currently, there's a thing that came out of the news last night that an average is about 1.6 is a low end ratio officer to citizen. There's a formula they use. The California average is 1.56. The city of San Bruno is 1.07. To me, I have a deep concern to affect our public safety first responders that are addressing the crimes on the street and the medical and fire needs in our community. To me, that is something that I have a hard time wanting to see curtailed any further than the reductions and the eliminations in some of the personnel that have already occurred. In the first responders only is what I'm referring to. I think that we need to address the issue because in essence, we can use the one-time this, the $300,000 from the S&K, which is for traffic impact, which that project is still under and is going, it's still in a work in progress, shall we say. Will there be something needed down the road? How can we sit here today and say that? So I get concerned when we kept using one time this and one time that because one time becomes every time. And have we been using these one times before to get a balanced budget? We're going to be short, as we've already been told, come July 1 by $1 million. Doing this doesn't resolve the problem of the budget. It doesn't address the problem we're going to face again in July 1. And the way I calculated from January 1 to June 30th, it's about an average of $7,200 a day that it's cost that we're going to be short between the 1.3. So to me, time is of the essence. So this is just some of my concerns and comments. I don't know if this really does address the problem. I also want to go back to something was said about the overtime. My understanding is that there have been reductions in both fire and police, that they are being monitored more closely. It also is a very good point that the mayor brought up about the strike team for the fire department, which was $200,000, which the state reimbursed the city. We, the council, have asked in the audits that it be better footmarked and noted so that people like us can say, okay, there is that overtime, but let's deduct $180,000 so we get a true value picture of what it's about. Because here it looks tainted. And I think that does a disservice to everyone. They say that's not the way you do it in accounting, but that's the way I understand it, and that's the way it should be. So I'm just throwing those out, but there was one question too. We talked about $150,000. Thank you for putting that slide up. Line item expenditure reduction, and that was also included for shared services if you go forward with the police chief. And how much of that $150,000 is actually for the police chief savings?
40,000.
Thank you. And we're talking about recreation revenue increases. Is this a definite? Is this a guarantee? Is this what we project and what we foresee and forecast?
The answer is that that is based on the trend that we are currently seeing in recreation revenues, and it is our projection for year end. At this point, we are projecting revenues and we are projecting expenditures for the year end. Until we get there, we can't give you that precise number, but it is our best guess based on the information available at this time.
And finally, and then I'll stop talking because I know I've probably gone over my 3 minutes. We have in reserves about 6 point whatever million. To me, reserves are important. They're critical. It wouldn't take much with the rains if a slide occurs. If we hadn't gotten Madison taken care of before all these storms had occurred, and we have something of a problem, a disaster, a catastrophe, a lawsuit. These are things that the reserves are there for. And to me, I also have an additional concern of going to the reserves. I just think it's there for a reason. It's there for emergencies. It's the taxpayers' money. And I think there is some expectation in our community for all of us to live within our means. I know we're talking about additional furloughs too. Here's my commentary on that. At some point, I think it becomes a burden to the employee. I think it hurts morale. I think it lessens productivity. So I think there has to be a point that you can't just keep furloughing. I don't think that's always the answer, because now some things are delayed. There's something at Cappuccino's delayed because the state is furloughed so much they can't get that project taken care of faster than they want with the demolition of the area that they want to demolish near the gymnasium, I found out. So these have a ripple effect, and it also affects then the citizens in the community that don't have those services available to them. So those are some of my feedback.
Okay. We talked about reserves and how critical they are. I guess the thing that scares me is you have a dealership in the city here, 2 dealerships. They're down close to 50%. That was before the recall of the Toyota mess. And we lost a dealership, San Bruno Ford, literally overnight. It cost us about $350,000 a year. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed and saying my prayers that these dealerships, reduced as they are at this point in time, can keep going, and this economy can feed them so that we can get fed also. Those are things that really scare me, because you talk about reserves, and I would hate to dip into them for something like that. I do agree with Rico on fire and police. They're down to bare bones. You can talk about all the ratios you want, and they're developed like actuarial tables are developed for retirement funds. The bottom line is, can you put people on the streets? Can you have decent response times? This council worked to avoid brownouts. We tried to get creative with staff to make these work, but yeah, we're right at minimum staffing for our departments, and it's tough. In the bigger picture, down the road, if we can work out something with surrounding cities, sharing chiefs, we're doing battalion chiefs now, we have a fire chief we share, maybe through attrition down the road, we can talk about commanders, sergeants, those kinds of things that can make an overall complex more efficient. But that's not tomorrow. That's going to be a little while down the road. We're employing individuals now to do some studies on potential fire mergers with four entities, and that has real potential, but we don't even have results yet. And hopefully that'll work out. There's a lot of issues there. Union contracts are different, so the issue is to try to see what we can do today to make this all work. Public Works, you know how many calls I got personally for potholes. It's a little thing, but these guys are out here on Sunday morning. Hopefully they can get them filled before the rain starts. They did it, but they're going to have to do it again. We're supposed to pave City Parkway. In the meantime, we're putting Band-Aids on it, and we can't do that until the spring. So there's all of these efficiencies. We're down to bare bones. We're down to bare bones. We've cut an awful lot of employees over the years. We're still making it work. This, frankly, is one of the most efficient cities on the whole peninsula. For me, an important thing, not just police and fire, public works, library, is recreation facilities. In this economy, and believe me, I had a lot of people working for me that are not working for me now, can't go out to dinner. They can't go to a movie. But what can they do? They can take their kids to a park and go on a swing. Or they can go to a rec center and lift some weights, or they can play a little basketball. Those are some of the things that I really think are important to preserve, because those are the little things that make a city with a heart, in fact, work. So we don't have any solid, I don't believe, recommendations tonight. I think in general, hopefully staff has heard kind of where we want to go. Let me ask the council one more time. We have some projected mid-year budget strategies, proposed strategies. How do you feel about where the manager and staff are going? Michael.
I have to agree with Rico that it is a little unnerving to really rely on some projected revenues that may or may not appear, but given that there really isn't, and I really have to rely on the department heads to tell me that they are working efficiently. I agree, just from what I've observed, that the departments are pretty much running a skeleton crew. I don't think that there are a lot of excesses. I don't know specifically where overtime, what was related to these one-time emergencies versus what's operating. I would assume that, those things are all in line. One concern I had was really just about, the optimal staffing, but I am comfortable that the staff is addressing those issues and that they are doing the best job possible with the minimum amount of staffing. Like Rico mentioned, furloughs are probably bad for morale, but I think being unemployed would be far worse for morale. So it's, we've pretty much stretched as far as we can on those. Reducing, 6 to 8 more positions, that's, again, going to be a really tough call. I would just say let's be careful that we don't lose people that we need and end up having to go into overtime to cover those positions. And, I think that the direction to not use reserves to cover these shortages, that's something that was decided before my time here. But I would think that the limited use of what we have in reserves right now is appropriate to cover this, assuming that everything is running as efficiently as it can. And again, we certainly don't want that to become the go-forward position that we're always going to dip into there. But although the light at the end of the tunnel is still pretty far off, I think that there is a light out there somewhere. And this is. These are difficult times, and it says right here on this slide, economic disaster, and I think that pretty well describes the situation that we're getting into. So I think that the staff recommendations are appropriate.
Thank you. Guess we have to hope that the light at the end of the tunnel is not the train coming the other way.
I was thinking that.
Yeah. Rico, what do you feel about the projected strategies?
Well, I think with my last commentary, I addressed what my views were.
Irene?
I think the staff did an excellent job in outlining what we can do. I understand everyone's concerns about one-time revenue. I share them. But in some ways, the redevelopment repayment is like a tenant. We're the landowners. The redevelopment's the tenant. They're paying us the way they're supposed to if you're a landowner. So that's, I'm not hesitant about taking money from redevelopment. I think we gave it to them when we started out, and it's their turn to give it back to us. So I'm not worried about that part. I would like us to look forward with the development impact fees, to look forward when we do get better, when the economy gets better, to put that money back into the reserve funds. And maybe at one time we had capital improvement funds set aside as well, that when we had, which has been a long time now, when we had over a certain percentage from Architect Joe's, we had a capital improvement fund. That has kind of gone by the wayside. But as we take these one-time funds, I'd like us to look at how to put them back eventually. I'm with Michael. Yes, furloughs are not fun, but total unemployment is even worse. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of employees out there. I don't know if they agree with me or not. I'm sure they can tell us one way or another if they would rather take 2 more days off a year without pay or not get paid at all. So that's kind of where it is. I agree with Connie that the 2-tiered employee retirement and medical benefits is something we really need to look at. 10 years, 5 years sounds like a long time, but it goes so fast. The other thing I want to remind people, yes, we're paying a lot for PERS, but Mr. O'Leary, didn't we for at least 4 or 5 years pay nothing? I mean, we had a time period where we didn't have to pay them anything because their investments paid themselves. We didn't need to put any money in, isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. And that's really, the reserves in some measure were established based on that saving of those dollars that otherwise would have been spent on employee retirement benefits.
Right, exactly. So we had good times. We fortunately looked forward to a rainy day and put the money that we would have had to pay for PERS into the reserve fund. So that's why we have the money now. So it all, it's all going to come back. So I agree with what's here. I would also like us to look into more, uses with more shared things, more use of facilities. I will keep thinking about things that we could possibly do, and I'm sure the people out there that are closer to what is actually happening can have some ideas as well. So,
Through the chair, I just wanted to follow up and clarify something on the furlough. What I want the council to be mindful of, the employees have already done that and gone there, some with the management leave as well. So as I've talked to some of the employees, the concern is not about, yes, we want to have everybody have a job, but if you get to such a high percent of furloughs, which is now a deduction in their salary, for some who look to management leave who don't get to cash that out, that's a big hit. What I meant by that is trying to retain the staff. If you continually go there and they can't live with what they're getting with the reductions, they'll have to go elsewhere. So that's what I meant about the morale. That's what I meant about productivity. And that's my concern at what is the pain threshold of furloughs that affect the homes and the people and these employees in their homes and their family life.
We have talked a lot about, over the last number of years, about takeaways and benefits and things like that. And I've said this, and I'll say it in public right now. The big takeaway is when Marion or Johnny or Joey or Sue, that used to sit next to you yesterday, is not there the next day. And this city and this council has really, really worked hard to try to avoid that situation. I'm not too keen on using reserves. It's a relatively small amount, but it could be a huge amount if we have to use those reserves. I'm not too keen on it, but if it has to get us through, while I like the manager to look at all of these general fund management suggestions, unfortunately including reducing the number of general fund employees, I think we have to do that. We have to look at every possible opportunity, because I just can't see, as Michael said, the light at the end of the tunnel. In the economy that I work in, I'm talking 18 months to 2 years, and it's a very difficult situation. So we have to look at every possible option, including, employees, personnel, programs, services. They may have to be cut back a little bit more than they are now, maybe in some cases a lot more, but I think we have to leave no stone unturned. So when will you be prepared to bring us back some concrete proposals, City Manager?
Let me, if I could first clarify what I think I've heard. There was some willingness to use one-time resources as proposed, and some not. And there is a desire for staff to continue to look at all program and service cut opportunities or options that, again, if I'm understanding correctly, would protect frontline public safety services, which is something that I heard from some members of the City Council. If the City Council is looking for additional, particularly staff reductions to address the $1.3 million for the current year, I will need a little bit of time that would probably extend past this next council meeting in order to be able to provide you with a more robust reduction, and in particular, reductions related to staff. If there is a general level of comfort with the recommendation as presented with perhaps some more specific comments from the City Council, we would be prepared to bring this back to you at your next regular City Council meeting. And again, I want to emphasize that the recommendation as presented strongly relies on significant additional reduction to the workforce to be initiated beginning immediately to have a full effect for the fiscal year beginning July 1 of 2010.
I again will just echo that I don't think it addresses the shortfall, because July 1, you're telling us we're going to be $1 million in the hole. And again, I think we're putting off and trying to get through to June 30th with not addressing fully the issue that we have here. And we're going into reserves, and we're going into repayments from redevelopment and equipment reserve, which, again, to me, in some ways, that was the reserves. That's what it was there for. So, again, I'll leave it there.
So well, go ahead, Irene.
Well, I'm confused, I guess. I understand what you're saying about the reserves and that you'd rather not use them.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves you $800,000 short if we don't use reserves. So staff is saying the only way to not use reserves and to have the $800,000, well, they don't. There is no way to do that the way it is. So what are you suggesting they do in lieu of using the reserves?
Because this information was just handed to me tonight, I haven't had my opportunity to go through and digest it and bring back some other concepts that I might have. But my concern is when we started this budget for the 09-210, we cut how much, thinking we'd be okay.
Yes.
We now are 6 months into it. We're short 1.3. Let's hope and pray, as the mayor said, that something else doesn't happen. Dealership, as was mentioned, because we'll be back here again. So this is what I get concerned with as far as the unknown. It's not certain times. They're scary times. I know I'm dealing with it myself. So again, to me, in the private sector, you need to go forward and you need to deal with it and get it resolved. You can't keep pushing it off. We've got to be able to be solvent. We need to be able to offer the citizens their services that they need, and we need to balance the budget. And I understand that this is the options that are placed before us tonight. I'm just voicing my reservations and concerns.
So your suggestion is to tackle it with all of the suggestions and whatever else the city manager can come up with based on what she's talked to you about here?
You know, right now this is what's before us, but again, like I said, it is using a lot of one-time this and one-time that, and I also would like to, I'm curious to go the last couple budgets and honestly see what we've utilized in order to balance the budgets over these last 4 years. Why have I sat up here to refresh my memory to see how much we have been going back, and if this is just all one time, or has it been one time a couple times? So but that's something I'm going to need to go and research.
Michael?
While I understand the concerns about using the reserves, there is a minimum cost to providing services. And I think we all agree that providing the same level of services to the citizens is probably our primary concern, and it's not something we want to see impacted. You know, the economies are cyclical, and we happen to be at a trough right now. And I think you know, the people spoke when they voted down a tax increase. But the fact of the matter is, it costs so much money to operate a city, and the only stable portion, or somewhat stable portion, is the taxes that we get from the citizens. Sales tax is extremely variable, very volatile, not something we could count on. So when we get to the point where our cost to operate the city far exceeds what we're bringing in from the people that pay for those services. I mean, if we were a business, we would shut the doors and say, hey, we can't do business anymore. But we don't have that luxury. We have a responsibility to keep the city going. And there are plenty of other cities in the state that have no reserve to turn to. And we are blessed to have that money. And so yeah, I personally think that this is an appropriate use given the circumstances. Again, there need to be constraints, and I'm wondering if it would be prudent or even feasible to maybe implement some policy that would help us limit how far we dip in there, how often we dip in there, and just really, give ourselves a little buffer, but still live within those means.
Yep. For the near future, I think that's a good idea. For right now, I guess the question is, are you comfortable, and it sounds like you are, using $298,800 of reserves at this point in time, which is a very critical point. But I think, and I'm not in favor of using reserves, but to get us through to where we can actually tackle what's going to happen after this, I think we can make it work. Like Irene said, the repayments of loans and things, if the redevelopment agency has the money, can repay that, that's fine, pay it back. It reduces the amount that we can use for actual redevelopment, and the state possibly will take away almost $2 million of that. But I think we have to look very seriously going forward at all, including personnel reductions for the next year, because I think we have to look 18 months to 24 months ahead.
May I make a recommendation
Yes.
here? What I would suggest is that we schedule this item to come back for discussion with the City Council at your next regular council meeting on the 23rd.
Right.
I would hope Councilmember Medina has raised the issue. This is a big amount of information to digest, and perhaps we would all benefit from the opportunity for further study and evaluation. And in particular, I want to point out two things. One is a suggestion that hearing the council's hesitancy about the use of reserve and one-time funds, that I could give you at least a preliminary review of what reductions to the general fund workforce would look like in aggregate in order to address the problem on an immediate basis. Secondly, I would just remind the City Council that the recommendation that you have in front of you does not attempt to or expect the continuing reliance on one-time or reserve resources in order to balance what is expected to be a continuing deficit. And in particular, it would just again reiterate the need for substantial workforce reduction in order to address this problem on a continuous basis, as well as the opportunity to consider new revenue resources that would be potentially available with work to be completed over the next 6 to 12 months, could be implemented not sooner than, but by the 1st of July of 2011. There are no viable, significant new revenue opportunities that I can recommend to you that would take effect for the fiscal year 2010-11. So again, my suggestion is that we bring this back to your next regular council meeting on the 23rd. And at that time, the council could make further consideration, the use of one-time resources, and consider the specifics of the further impacts if this deficit amount were resolved with workforce reductions immediately.
All right, very good. Any other comments from the council?
I have a
Irene?
clarification, thank you. On all your new enhanced revenues, they're all have to be voter approved. So my understanding is they, or except for the first one with the lighting and landscape benefit assessments, the rest of them have to be done at a municipal election. So that, and our next one would be, and it has to be when a council member is up for election as well, is it not?
That's correct.
So November 2011 is the next time we could do it. So even if we do all these other things, we still might look at doing some kind of assessment or tax or something, even if it's a quarter cent. It would take us that long and that much education for everyone to get something passed by then anyway. So just something we should look at as well.
Is everyone clear on the manager's suggestion? We'll get a more precise breakout of what it would take to get this done, also with immediate personnel reductions in the picture. Correct? Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, we don't have a closed session tonight. Something else?
Connie?
No?
We're good.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what else we can